here's the host.
Welcome to tonight's edition of Inside Scoop Virginia Politics. I'm here tonight with Kris Amundson, and we are going to start out talking about a wonderful gala that was held on Saturday night in Richmond. It was by the Women's Strike Force. You've seen Kris here before talking about the Strike Force. We've got some clips so you can get a sense of who was there and kind of the energy that was in the room, and it was terrific. Kris, did it meet your expectations?
You know, it just, we were just absolutely thrilled with Saturday night's event. It was kind of our coming out party, as it were. It was really the first time that the Women's Strike Force had tried to do any kind of event bigger than a house party. And we certainly had a great headliner star in Madeline Stowe, who is the star of the TV show Revenge, and she just turned out to be a terrific guest. She really is very bright, very committed to this issue, and totally gets it.
She was very interesting because she said during her presentation that she thought the Women's Strike Force ought to go national.
She did indeed, and at some point that might be something we would consider, but we have always told people that we are a Virginia PAC. Our focus is on Virginia, and Lord knows there's plenty for us to do here. We don't really need to be looking beyond our borders, since 63 of the members of the General Assembly voted for personhood or voted for the ultrasound bill, and many of those were, you know, the same people voted for both of those very bad pieces of legislation. So our focus with the Women's Strike Force continues to be on November of 2013, when every single member of the Virginia House of Delegates is up for election, and that's what we're aiming to do.
Well, it's a worthy goal because the people that voted for that need to be held accountable for it, and as I recall, a number of them ran uncontested the last time. My understanding, and anybody who knows me knows that you should never completely trust me on numbers, so I will give you an approximate number and say about 2/3 of those 63 who voted for those bad bills ran unopposed in 2009. We can never let that happen again, and one of the reasons that we want to be a bipartisan PAC is that there are, frankly, some of those districts, Bettina, and you and I know it, you look at those numbers, and they're, you know, very heavily gerrymandered, so that a Democrat, for example, probably would have a relatively tough time. But in those districts, we can run a Republican in a primary campaign. We can run primary opponents followed by general election opponents. We want to have the maximum flexibility because our issue remains that people who voted for those bad bills need to be held accountable. They need to be asked to explain themselves to the voters. Well, let's go to a couple of clips here because we did some interviews while we were down, and it was really terrific. And the first person is a fellow named Wayne Powell, and Wayne is running for Congress against the notorious in Democratic circles, Eric Cantor. And I asked him what he was doing there, and then I asked him this because my understanding is that the personhood bill, there's a federal version of it, and so I asked Wayne Powell this. Coming up before Congress apparently is going to be this personhood bill, which came up in Virginia and is one of the impetuses for the Women's Strike Force. When you beat Eric Cantor, what are you going to do about voting on the personhood bill when it comes before the Congress?
Well, that's an easy answer. I'm going to vote against it. I think, again, it infringes on women's rights. It would even interfere with their obtaining contraception. As a man, I've never had any issue getting contraception, and I think that women should stand in the same place as men. I don't know why these politicians, particularly the Republicans, want to turn the clock back 60 years prior to 1950. I mean, women are not chattel. They're not to be controlled. They're to be revered and considered equal in every respect, including handling what they need to handle with their bodies and making their own decisions. They don't need men, they don't need politicians, and they don't need the government to help them make those decisions.
pretty clear.
You know, and I always find it so ironic that the very people who are railing against the president's health care bill because they don't think that they want to have the government in any way involved with health care are perfectly happy to have the government involved in women's bodies. And I've never been able to quite put those two issues together.
It's really, it is kind of an inconsistency, but you know, what's that? They must go on that saying that, you know, consistency is the hobgoblin of small minds.
Right, exactly.
Like that. I have no idea. I just found it kind of fascinating that they were that way. I have another one that we're going to try and see if we can run with a young fellow that I met there, who is actually the outreach director for the Women's Strike Force.
Exactly.
Jake. His name is Jake. And
our next guest, Jake Evans. Jake is the outreach director for the Women's Strike Force. And Jake, how did you, I mean, you're a guy, how did you end up being the outreach director for the Strike Force?
Well, when I first started hearing about the personhood bills and the mandatory ultrasound bill, I was just as worried as my fellow women counterparts were. And it affects young people quite a bit too. When you start talking about contraception and the morning after pill and abortions and things of that nature, we're fighting for our generation and our individual liberties just as much as the past generations have fought for this issue. It's sad that we have to fight this again, but I just felt like I needed to be a part of that fight. You know, I'm thinking about my mother, my, you know, future daughter that I may have one of these days, you know, and it's just as important for men to be involved. And that's why we have a board member, Stephen Cochran, who's on, and I'm a male staff member, so, you know, men are involved in this cause, and it's really important that they start to get involved even more.
he makes an interesting comment about the generations, because certainly those of us who went through this fight the first time really didn't expect to be doing it a second time. How are you all going to attract the young
Well,
people?
I will just tell you that one of the most surprising and really encouraging things for me has been to see the reaction of this next generation. And it really was the ultrasound bill and the personhood bill that did it. Our donors include a significant percentage of younger voters, of people in the 30 and, you know, in the roughly 30-year-old age range, the next generation. They never believed us when we said they're coming after birth control. Oh, my daughter would say, Mom, you know, really, Mom? Really? I mean, like, that's so over. Well, now they understand that they really are going after contraception. And just in case anybody out there watching is not aware, this is not just about abortion. It is about birth control. It is about absolutely limiting women's reproductive choices.
Well, and that's something that I think is one of the things that is encouraging to me, is that younger women, there's sort of a shock value. You know, nobody thought that they were going to have to do this. Everyone had the sort of impression that your daughter had, that nobody's going to do this. This is, come on, this is a constitutional right. We have a right to privacy, you know, Roe v. Wade, well, you know.
Griswold, you know, which is like, you know, much older.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. It's just a craziness to be saying, well, we're going to go after and pass these laws that affect your ability to get any kind of birth control. One of the things, a number of months ago, I had Margaret Sanger's granddaughters on the show, and one of the things that they talked about was how women forget that before birth control was generally available, you had no control. You couldn't have a real career because you couldn't control when you were going to have kids. Right. You had immense child poverty, because there were just so many children who were unwanted, their parents were unable to take care of them, and we forget those days, that they aren't that far away, and that taking away the rights to birth control takes us right back into that situation. If you can't control it, then, you know, and people can say all they want, just say no. That whole abstinence thing, I'm hoping people realize that's not realistic. in this day and age. Actually, it wasn't very realistic back in the day either. From
it didn't work very well, did it?
It didn't work very well. And the number of people who had premature babies, but they seemed to be fully grown when they were born because they were sort of faking it. But it's a very difficult thing, and hopefully people will pay attention to it. Now let me see if I have the last one, because I want to see if I've got this one keyed up. It's a little more difficult to do, and it may not work. I may need to do it later. There she is. But I'm not sure that's what I want. So let's talk about what the strike force is doing. Now, people can be members of the strike force.
Right.
Do they go onto a website and join? What's that process?
WomenStrikeForce.org.
Okay.
And then you can become a member. Obviously, our biggest task right now is raising money, because although we are a Virginia PAC, we are not participating in the federal elections this year, but we are trying as hard as we can to amass as much money as it'll be possible for us to raise, so that in 2013 we can come after as many of the members of the House who voted for those bad bills as we possibly can. And I will say this, we have received contributions that range from $5 to 5 figures, and every single contribution is really valued and really important to us, because the other thing that we will start to do then is communicate with those people and say, here's what we're doing these days, or there's a house party going on in your area, or here's something you could do to get involved. And all of those are going to be really critically important as we approach the 2013 election. Now, I know that everybody's focused on 2012, and I am too, and it's a very important election. But what we cannot afford to have is what happens so often in Virginia, is that people, having then done their duty in presidential year, say, well, I'm done. I knocked on doors in 2009 and people said, well, I voted for Barack Obama. I don't have to worry about this. I said, well, I voted for Barack Obama too, but he's actually, the last time I checked, he wasn't going to be building the roads. He wasn't going to be taking care of, pollution in the Chesapeake Bay. That's not his job. So it is critically important that even though people are going to be involved in the 2012 election, that we not forget that 2013 will have a huge impact on what happens in Virginia.
Well, we can hear the music, which means we are going to go to break. Stay with us. We are going to be back. We will have Tarina Keene with NARAL Pro-Choice Virginia joining us.
Too many women get hit by their boyfriends and husbands. Too many women are pressured into having unprotected sex. Half of the people in the world living with AIDS are women. It doesn't have to be this way. Together, we can change this reality. Let's strive for a world free of violence.
At Volunteers of America, we don't just give kids a way to stay off the streets. We give them the tools they need to reach their full potential. We don't just help the elderly receive needed care. We help them live life to the fullest. We don't just provide food for homeless individuals and families. We provide job training and placement so they can buy groceries. Volunteers of America is a national organization that for over 100 years has provided programs and services that allow people to overcome their challenges to become vital members of their community. At Volunteers of America, we don't just help people, we help people help themselves. Find out how you can support the programs that are working in your community. Contact Volunteers of America today. Call 1-800-899-0089.
Drivers face all kinds of distractions.
Guys, stop playing. No. Of 127 consecutive.
Before your wireless phone becomes one of them, stop. Drive safely. Keep Keep your phone in easy reach and dial sensibly. In bad weather or traffic, call later and use a hands-free device. Remember, with wireless, safety is your call.
We're back to the Inside Scoop. Here again, your host.
Welcome back. We are talking about the war on women, particularly in Virginia. And we have been joined during the break by Tarina Keene. She is the Executive Director of NARAL Pro-Choice Virginia. And we're going to be talking to her about other things that happened during the General Assembly as well, because everyone focused on the transvaginal ultrasound issue and all of the craziness that went on about that. But that's just one of the ways that the current Republican regime in Virginia is trying to restrict women's rights to their own reproductive health and bodily integrity. So we're going to talk with Tarina about it. Thank you for coming. I know it was quite a schlep in from Arlington, where your offices are, so I appreciate you coming. Some of the other major bills, and the first one we talked about a little bit with Kris, which is the HB1. It's Bob Marshall's bill. It's called the Personhood Bill. Right. For those folks who have already forgotten what the Personhood Bill does, can you give it to us in a sentence or two? What's actually the impact of that?
Sure. Well, it basically grants fertilized eggs the same constitutional rights that you and I have. And what it would do in terms of the Code of Virginia is that we have found the word person 25,000 times in the Code of Virginia. So you can imagine that if you grant personhood rights to a fertilized egg, that all of those laws will apply to that fertilized egg. That could mean complete chaos in the terms of, in the legal world in Virginia. So that's one good way of looking at it. But really what this bill's intent is to set up an avenue to outlaw abortion and birth control in the event of a reversal of Roe v. Wade.
So does it not take effect until Roe v. Wade is completely reversed? Is that, this is sort of a waiting game, as they're hoping the Supreme Court will decide they'll get a case that they can use to overturn Roe v. Wade?
Right. Well, thankfully the bill did not pass. We had some rational minds prevailed this year. But yes, the intent would be, the way that it's written, is that we would have to wait for a reversal of Roe v. Wade to have the impact on reproductive rights. But in the meanwhile, if this bill would pass, those effects from those 25,000 hits in the code would be in effect immediately.
Which would be amazingly awful for everybody. Although I guess it would be great for the HOV lines. I mean, who's gonna be able to challenge you if you say, well,
absolutely,
what's the poor police officer supposed to do with that?
Right. Well, and the AG and the governor and many of the members of the of the General Assembly would definitely argue that you're dealing with a person.
You're dealing with a person. Now, it passed. HB1 actually did pass the General Assembly, right?
Passed the House.
Passed the House.
Right.
And Kris, before you came on the show, Kris and I were talking about the need to challenge all of these folks who were voting for the HB1 or voting for the Personhood Bill to say, to be held accountable. So those folks in the House of Delegates, and they're the ones who are up next year in 2013, those folks did take a stand. It's out there on HB1 because it cleared the House of Delegates. Is that right?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
And then it also cleared this initial Senate committee, and then somehow didn't get past the Senate. What happened? How did these saner heads prevail, so to speak?
Well, there's some interesting thought behind this about what happened. We actually were told during the Senate committee hearing, that it would not pass. We had assurances from both sides of the aisle, Republican and Democrat, that this particular bill was not going to pass. And actually, the governor did not want it to pass. That at least was the information that we had from a lobbyist standpoint. But there are some real zealots on the Senate Ed and Health Committee, and they were bound and determined to get that out of committee, and they did by one vote. What happened after that is something that I have never seen before. Maybe Delegate Amundson has seen this in her time at the General Assembly, but it got out of committee. They went to the floor for that day, and they called a special, it was basically a special calendar was brought up on the floor. We are just watching the session as it happens, and everybody just dropped. We didn't know if they were calling this special calendar because they did say HB1 would be on the special calendar. And within just a matter of minutes, we went from being dumbfounded that the bill actually passed out of committee to this special calendar and the Senate Majority Leader calling another vote. And 6 Republicans, typically who are anti-choice, all voted to defeat the bill on the floor. So they took a vote right on the floor the very same day it came out of committee with a special calendar. So they really wanted to get rid of it. I think they know that the impact was dire from a political standpoint as well as a practical standpoint, and so they did everything they could to get rid of it.
Now, was that, when we talk of political, and I'd like your impression of this,
Sure.
was this, because this was during a time frame when Bob McDonnell was still sort of thinking he was going to get to be a vice presidential possibility. Is that what was driving this, was trying to get it off fast so that McDonnell's chances of this were not going to be...
I will just say this, when the Senate wants to get rid of something, they have the ability, they have proved, and there are only 40 of them, and they've proved in the past that they have the ability to be very nimble. Delegate Algie Howell from the Tidewater area had a piece of legislation several years ago. You might remember the saggy pants bill.
Oh gosh,
and we were getting wonderful press on that as well. And the minute it got to the Senate, they called a committee hearing while we were actually still on the floor of the House debating other legislation, which meant that Delegate Howell couldn't even get to the committee hearing, and they killed it just like that. So when the Senate decides they want to move, and when the power structure over there makes a decision that this bill is bad for the Senate, they have no qualms about just sticking the knife in quickly. And I think that's exactly what happened. I think they believed that it would get killed in the committee. Yes. And when it didn't, this was also a message to whoever on the committee did not vote the way he or she had been expected to. Right. This was sending a little message to Senator whoever, Senator mystery person who was not supposed to vote for this bill. It was supposed to die in committee, and it was like, okay, it's gone.
Right, right. Wow. Well, that's nice to know they can act that quickly. Let's hope that they are similarly motivated, since, as I understand it, the personhood bill's coming up again next year. Bob Marshall,
you can guarantee that.
I think Delegate Marshall, who used to have an office next to mine and who ironically used to work with me on issues related to children with autism, for example. And at one point we carried a bill, I think it was on autism, and we walked into the committee, and the chairman of the committee looked at us and said, well, all I can say is one of you couldn't have possibly read this bill. But so I know him through issues like that, and what I will tell you is that he is a very determined person. He is not, just because he hasn't been successful this year, is not in any way a suggestion that he's going to say, well, I just will give up on that and won't try again. I'm sure he'll be back. Right. And he'll have found some new little little twist that he feels like might possibly get this bill, you know, another vote or something.
And he will have to find a new twist, actually, because what his talking points have been, his whole premise for introducing this bill, at least in the recent couple of years, is that it would provide an avenue for expectant parents who have tragically lost a pregnancy due to someone else's negligence. So he was basically saying it was filling the gap of the tort code. And what we know to be true is that's not the intent. That was just the argument that they were using in trying to, you know, change the conversation. Well, this year, hopefully there was a little outsmarting going on, and the General Assembly did pass a piece of legislation that actually works that into the code. It's very specific. A woman who, you know, may have been in a car accident or some other way victimized, and she lost a pregnancy, she would have the right to sue the person who was negligent and caused the miscarriage or what have you. It's very, very specific, and so he will not have that talking point anymore. He's going to have to find a new twist.
He will
be very, very direct on what his true intentions are.
Yeah. Wow. Now, what was the NARAL Pro-Choice Virginia had a whole response. You've got a rapid legislative response team or something like that?
We do.
And how does that work? Was that specifically for this legislation, or is that a broad-based program that you guys do?
Well, actually, every year at the beginning of the General Assembly session, we recruit new members to the Rapid Response Team. It's the Choice Rapid Response Team. And we ask people to be ready during the legislative session to act quickly, send emails, make phone calls to legislators, write blog posts, and just respond as quickly as possible to whatever is happening. Because we know in the General Assembly, things happen very quickly on a dime. And we could tell somebody at 11:30 that the personhood bill passed out of committee, and then at 1:30, wait,
it's all done.
It's all done.
Yeah, right.
But it's really interesting because we have, I would say, at this point, dozens and dozens of rapid responders. And what they are also charged in doing is not only responding themselves, but recruiting friends, coworkers, family, whatever, to also do that. And so we have been told by legislators that they will receive hundreds, if not thousands, of emails and phone calls. Like they will have them jammed up. We will have them jammed up as when something is happening. So it's very effective, and sometimes maybe a little burdensome on the legislators, but we get our point across.
That's right. And one of the differences, because we're in Washington, we'll talk about one of the differences between how Richmond operates and how Washington operates, maybe right after the break. I'm hearing the music.
You're hearing the music. You are such a good guest.
Cued.
You are cued into how this system works. We will be back after the break, so stay with us for some more conversation.
This is firstgov.gov, where we're obsessed with getting you government information.
Brand new student loan applications on the site, baby. This calls for a celebration. Where's your uncle?
So in the end, it was either take the astronaut gig or come work here. What can I say? Duty called.
Dude, that's my cop.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah. No, I'm pretty sure that's Sam's cop.
Oh, sorry?
Yeah. No. Sam's. No.
Just log on or email us and get what you need.
C, change of address form. That's how it's done. D, driver's license renewal.
E, emailing Social Security information.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Nice, we'll allow it. All right, Ed. What are those?
Government surplus cars for auction.
You posted those online last time.
No, you did.
I'm posting them online this time.
For all your government information, firstgov.gov.
Oh, what have we got here? Sometimes you feel tired. You can't seem to lose those extra pounds off your midsection. And your joints hurt when you take the stairs. Well, you're getting older. But I'm happy to say that there's some simple things we can do to keep you happy and healthy for years to come. We can also lower your risk for some serious diseases the older population is often subject to. Proper nutrition is more important than ever. Your body has changed, you know. Not as many treats. A basic exercise plan, lots of walks and fresh air, and most importantly, come and see me for twice-yearly checkups to help ensure the best possible quality of life. Now, how does that sound? Good boy.
Improve the quality of life for your elderly pet. Schedule twice-yearly checkups that include preventive care and regular lab work. A message from the veterinary members of the American.
We're back to the Inside Scoop. Here again, your host.
Welcome back. We have Tarina Keene with NARAL Pro-Choice Virginia and Kris Amundson, a founder and director of the Women's Strike Force. And I want to give the call-in number, so if there's anybody who would like to call in with a question, you can do so. It's 571-749-1166. If you're more the email type, you can do insidescoop@nova.org, and that will send us your email. So I want to talk clinic regulations, because I understand there is late breaking news on that. So let's start with the new news, and then we'll back up for those people who may not be familiar with what we're talking about with clinic regulations.
Okay. Well, on June 15th, the Board of Health came together to vote on permanent regulations for abortion providers, first trimester abortion providers in Virginia. And during that meeting, something happened that we had been advocating for, but we didn't feel like we had the votes to actually make it happen. That was that we wanted the Board of Health to grandfather in the existing facilities, the 20 existing first trimester abortion providers, into the regulations. And what that means is that they would not be subjected to hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars of renovations to actually upgrade their facilities to be hospitals, which is something that has never been required of existing facilities when it comes to regulations. It is just unheard of. So on June 15th, actually the Board of Health agreed with us. People who sit on the board, who were both appointed by Governor Keene, a Democrat, and Governor McDonnell, a Republican, agreed that that was too onerous, too burdensome, that asking these facilities, some of them who have been operating for 4 decades, since the early 70s, to actually meet these really onerous and unnecessary requirements. Today, actually just on my way in to the TV station, I received some information that the Attorney General is refusing to certify the regulations.
And what does that mean? He's not going to certify?
Well, if he doesn't certify them, this means that it forces the regulations to go back to the Board of Health to reconsider. And so they'll have another chance to reconsider the regulations in September.
Now, why would anyone expect a different result if they just made this decision in June?
Actually, that's an interesting question. Why would he? Actually, the Attorney General all along has been giving some erroneous legal advice to the Board of Health. And last September, actually, when the draft regulations and emergency regulations were first introduced to the Board of Health, the Attorney General's office basically said that the new law that actually directed the Board of Health to implement these regulations, as well as existing code, said that they didn't have a choice, that they had to turn these facilities into basically new facilities. They had to treat them as if they were never in existence and that they were new hospitals. And I think the Board of Health at that time, I don't think, had enough information. I think there was a little intimidation and some confusion going on because the Attorney General is supposed to be their legal guide. But what we have been able to do over the last few months is to disprove this and discredit the Attorney General. The Attorney General is an activist Attorney General, and what he is purporting is basically legal fiction. And we will definitely continue to advocate in that direction and do what we have to do to make sure that the Board of Health really stands resolute in their decision that they do not have to follow these guidelines, that they have the power to grandfather in first trimester abortion facilities to not have to meet these really onerous and expensive and unnecessary hospital code requirements.
Now, you've said unnecessary, and I recall when this came up, and I will note, since the strike force is bipartisan, that this particular legislation passed before the Republicans took over the Senate. So, and we can go into that, but we won't. But basically that shouldn't have happened. It did happen, and now it's there. And what they kept arguing, what people kept saying is, oh, this is a really dangerous procedure, and this is a safety issue. And so all we're really doing is making these first trimester clinics protect the patients. Right. So why isn't that a good thing?
Well, we know that abortion is one of the most common medical procedures performed not only in the Commonwealth of Virginia but nationwide. I think by the time a woman is 45, I think it's 1 out of every 3 women in this country will have had an abortion. And in the Commonwealth of Virginia, the average is around 26,000 a year. We do not have a problem with providing safe, legal abortion care in Virginia. In fact, it is one of the safest medical procedures provided and also the most common, as I just noted. There is a less than 0.3% percentage for any kind of problems with the surgical procedure. It is amazingly safe. And I can tell you personally, as someone who is a woman and an advocate for women's reproductive health care, that if I thought that there was ever a problem going on in these facilities or with this particular procedure, I would be the first to stand up and publicly to denounce what was going on and to demand that these regulations be more strident. But what we know is that we have very capable, very competent, and overly responsible providers when it comes to abortion. If you've seen across this country and even here in Virginia that doctors are under the microscope when it comes to abortion. If there were women who were being harmed on a regular basis or anything that was going on in these facilities, people would be yelling from the rooftops, and that's not what we're having. What we're seeing is that certain organizations who advocate against abortion are literally making things up. They have no proof, and time again during these committee meetings, they have been asked to provide proof, and they have nothing to show. So we feel like our abortion providers are top-notch, and all the evidence actually reflects that.
So it's really not a safety issue. This is a philosophical argument of the people who want to restrict access to what is a constitutionally protected right, and those who say, no, you can't do that, you shouldn't be doing that.
Absolutely.
So between now and September, is there any action that people who are concerned about this issue ought to be taking? Is the Board of Health a kind of entity that you write letters to, or how do people try and impact that decision? Because the Attorney General is not up to be voted out until next year. So
yes, this is true. Well, I can tell you a couple of ways. So NARAL Pro-Choice Virginia is the leader of the Virginia Coalition to Protect Women's Health. Our website is coalitionforwomenshealth.org. We will be advocating, and what we have been doing over the last year and a half since this bill went into effect is we have been educating Board of Health members. We've been asking the general public, educating the general public first and foremost, And then having them make phone calls, do visits, send emails, send personal letters to the Board of Health to continue to ask them to, at this point, stay strong and to make sure that they continue to grandfather in these facilities, but to also fall back on their medical expertise. Many of these members of the Board of Health are medical professionals. They're in doctor's offices every day or similar types of positions where they are charged with protecting patients' rights, protecting patients' health, and also access. If you do not have access to health care, then you basically, it's banned to you. It's not available to you. And that's certainly the case with abortion care. Abortion can be legal in name only. And if they are successful in shutting down these 20 healthcare providers, these very brave, top-notch healthcare providers, then women of all sorts across the state will not have access to safe, legal abortion care.
Well, we'll keep an eye on that, and hopefully people will go to the website, figure out what they can do, because I was one of those that was very encouraged by the action that they took in June, and surprised but encouraged. So that's not wonderful. Let me ask you, I want to go back to what Kris was saying before we went to the break about the difference between Washington and Virginia and how these things work through.
Well, and I just think that people who are in Washington and attuned to the somewhat glacial pace at which Congress tends to move, in which you know weeks before that it's, there will be a hearing on such and such a date. In Richmond, it is not unusual when you are the patron of a piece of legislation to find out after 10 o'clock at night that your bill is going to be heard the next morning before 7 in the morning. So by rapid response, when Tarina talks about setting up a rapid response, it is really rapid because the General Assembly of Virginia is in session fewer days, I believe, than any other legislature, or certainly almost any other legislature. And that has not in any way curtailed the appetite for introducing legislation. This year and the last several years, not always legislation that we would support. So the ability to respond really quickly is absolutely essential. And if you feel like, gosh, I'll just wait until that comes up, it may be 8 hours from now, from the first time that you hear about it. It may be in committee the next morning, and then, as we just heard in the case of House Bill number 1, that could also mean that it's on the floor at 2 o'clock in the afternoon and acted on by the body that day.
Mm-hmm. That's extraordinary, because we had in this past General Assembly session all of these protests that went on down at the Capitol, right. And it was, to think that it's that quick and you need to be able to orchestrate this outpouring immediately.
Right. This is one of the ways I think that social media has really changed what happens in Richmond, because it was very definitely part of the way that things got done, or more to the point, sometimes didn't get done, was you could just push it off till the dark of night. Well, now with social media,
can't do that.
Because citizens can really be involved at a moment's notice.
Right. Excellent point. We'll hope folks go to that website, pay attention, so that this doesn't sneak up to us. We have one more segment. Stay with us.
Listen to smoke before you give it a try. Only you. Don't play with matches. Don't play with fire. Cause there's nothing very funny about ripped off money. Nothing very nice on a homeless mind. So if a gorgeous force is what you desire, don't play with matches. Don't play with fire.
Only you can prevent wildfires.
Fire.
Why don't you just wash your car at home?
When I wash my car, everything runs down the street and down into the storm drains. With all the chemicals and the soaps and waxes, the last thing I want to do is poison my own drinking water. At least here, it's all contained and recycled on site. That's why I also take my car in for oil changes instead of doing it myself. I might take a chance on spilling stuff. You know what the best part is?
What?
more time to kick back and watch the game.
How far would you go to protect the planet?
I want you to build an ark.
Here we go. Okay, that's good. Oh, okay. Ow!
Maybe there's another way.
People, the flood is imminent. Is it too much to ask for a little precipitation?
Go to fightglobalwarming.com to find out what you and your community can do to reduce global warming pollution.
Somewhere around the world, there are men and women of the armed forces risking their lives, helping rebuild communities after natural disasters, collecting toys for needy children, tutoring kids in school. These are your sons and daughters who work to keep us safe, secure, and free. Dedicated men and women who put their country first.
We're back to the Inside Scoop. Here again, your host.
Welcome back. We have Tarina Keene with NARAL Pro-Choice Virginia and Kris Amundson, who is the founder and director of the Women's Strike Force. And we're going to do two things in our final segment. We want to talk about the pregnancy crisis centers. These are folks involved with the ultrasound bill. And then we want to talk about, I've got another clip I want to show from the Women's Strike Force Gala event over the weekend, and talk about sort of going forward and what people are going to be doing. So tell me about, everybody knows about transvaginal ultrasounds. and you have this picture, but frankly I'm too nervous to show it. Although I still say the words. 24 hours before an abortion, you have to have this ultrasound. Yes. There's no state funding for it. The issue came up of, well, what about the women who can't afford this? Yes. And the response was that they could go to these things called crisis pregnancy centers, and there would be free ultrasounds available. Right. But from what I understand, that's not actually the real story. So what's the real story?
Right. Well, a crisis pregnancy center is essentially a fake clinic. They lure women in who are obviously going through a crisis moment in their lives, trying to determine whether they're pregnant or not. And once they get the diagnosis of pregnancy, we call them CPCs, for crisis pregnancy centers. Basically, their true intent is to talk you out of having an abortion. And even if they find out you're not pregnant, they try to talk you out of using birth control. So that's a whole other issue. But yeah, they're 501c3 organizations, meaning that they're charitable organizations set up. A lot of them are based religiously based, which is perfectly fine. But what their intention is to deceive women into making the decision that they want them to make. It's to take away their choice in making the best decision for them. If these places were only set up to help women in a time of crisis, then that's not something that we would be opposed to. It's the deception of using medically erroneous information, pretending to be a healthcare provider when you're not. These facilities are not bound by HIPAA, which is basically what protects your privacy in your doctor's office, that they cannot reveal your medical information. These facilities are not bound by those laws. And it's a real detriment to, I would say, women's autonomy. And unfortunately, here we have this conflict of interest where you have the General Assembly and a regulatory body right now basically saying that first trimester abortion providers need to be regulated for women's health and safety. At the same time, they're basically making a list, a government-sanctioned list of crisis pregnancy centers to actually do a medical procedure with people who are not actually medically trained or are not even real medical providers, which is just unfathomable to me. The conflict of interest is just really beyond me.
I had not realized it was actually a government-generated list.
It is.
This is outrageous.
It is. And that's what, as part of the ultrasound law, it is actually written into the Code of Virginia that the Virginia Department of Health is to generate this list of free places to receive an ultrasound. And if you look at the list, every one of them is a crisis pregnancy center. Now, in 2009, NARAL Pro-Choice Virginia actually took it upon ourselves to visit all 52 crisis pregnancy centers. We did an undercover investigation, and we just wanted to see what these facilities were actually telling women. And you would be shocked at what they will say and what the lengths that they will go to deter you from being, if they think you are abortion-minded, they will deter you, and they will tell you things like abortion causes breast cancer, which has been debunked by ACOG, which is the American College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists, the AMA. I mean, every major medical association has debunked that abortion causes breast cancer. They will say some of the most outrageous things, and you can look at our report online at naralva.org to find out a little bit more. But what we are really appalled about is that now we have this state-sanctioned list out there, and women who are going through a crisis pregnancy or an unplanned pregnancy certainly deserve nothing but the truth, and they deserve the respect of being able to make those decisions, whether she chooses to terminate her pregnancy or go through with her pregnancy or to give her pregnancy up for adoption. That is her decision and her decision alone, and she can involve whoever she wants in that decision, but certainly strangers who with a political or ideological agenda should not be pressuring her to make a decision that may not be in her best interest.
Well, one of the things at the gala last weekend that Madeline Stowe said was, nobody wakes up in the morning and says, isn't this a great day, I think I'll go have an abortion. That this is a difficult decision for people to make.
Absolutely.
And making it more difficult and trying to shame people is not respecting women and respecting their ability to make decisions. So I want to talk a little bit about where we're going to go from here, and I have one last clip. This is of Catherine Waddell, who is also one of the founders of the Strike Force. And Catherine, as I understand the story, and I'm sure Kris, you'll tell me if it was wrong, is a lifelong Republican who was going to run as a delegate. But because she's pro-choice, the Republicans had a problem with that, and she ended up being an independent as a result.
That's correct.
So I guess that sort of rigid ideology sort of turned what had been a real good Republican into an independent. So let's see what she has to say.
What is the Strike Force going to do? What are the plans? This is a fabulous evening here. Lots of women from all over the state gathering here in Richmond. You're raising money, more money. And what are you going to do with all of it?
What we're going to do is we're going to recruit and support independents, Republicans, Democrats, men and women who support women's reproductive rights, and we're going out there and we're going to target races, and we're going to defeat the people that voted in favor of the transvaginal ultrasound bill. 63 members of the General Assembly, House of Delegates, voted in favor of that bill. And one question I ask people is, who do you think should make decisions about women's reproductive health care? The woman and her doctor or the government? The woman and her doctor or Bob McDonald?
Which I think is a great question, because the concept of saying, oh yes, let's have these male legislators, or Bob McDonald, or Ken Cuccinelli, who apparently is willing to just mush the law, not only in your area in terms of what he was telling the Board of Health. We've seen all of these outrageous cases he's brought, and he keeps getting thrown out of court, and he is totally an activist attorney general and not doing really what the people need him to be doing in the normal course. So we're going to recruit, and how is that being done?
Well, it's being done in the only way that you can really recruit people, which is person by person. But we want people to know that if you go to our website, which is womensstrikeforce.org, we will get in touch with you and we will help you, because the process of getting on the ballot is going to be different if you're running as a Republican or a Democrat, or if you're running as an independent, whether you're running in a primary or you're not. It's all, it's none of it brain surgery, but it certainly is stuff that you need to know going in, and we are more than happy to provide basic advice on this is what you need to do if you want to be, if you are a Republican woman, say, and you want to challenge an anti-choice, a Republican delegate who voted for personhood and voted for ultrasound, we'll explain to you the process of getting onto the into a Republican primary or a Republican nominating contest. If, on the other hand, you want to run in the general election, that's a different process, and we'll help you through that process as well, because it is, as I said in the beginning, 2/3 in round numbers of the people who voted for personhood and ultrasound ran unopposed in 2009. What that means, of course, is that they believe that there is absolutely no consequence to their making votes like that. We need it to be the sort of thing that before bad legislation like this gets that kind of widespread support in the House again, that people go, ooh, this could cost me my job. And, you know, they will start to vote on behalf of their constituents as opposed to on behalf of the ideologically most rigid section of their party. Mm-hmm. And that is our entire goal. So we will provide advice to people, but most important, as we all know, we'll be providing money. And that's our goal. We probably won't defeat all 63. Here's a shock. We may not defeat all 63. We don't really need to. We need to have some high-powered wins, and we need to make some other delegates who not only ought to know better, but in point of fact do know better, and who know that the women in their districts are not happy with them. And that's what it's going to take to begin to turn this state around.
Well, I think it's important to note that you're looking at supporting Democrats, Republicans, Independent.
That's
You're
right.
not saying to someone in a Republican area of Virginia, if you want to run against the Republican incumbent, you have to convert, so to speak, to something else. You're saying, we can give you the information, we can give you the help to challenge that person as a Republican, or I guess as Catherine Waddell did, ending up becoming an independent because it was unacceptable.
Well, I'll tell you that some of the most active people at the event on Saturday night were Republican women who are absolutely outraged that their party has been taken over. They may be economic conservatives, they certainly have a point of view, but they never imagined that a religiously driven agenda was going to take over their party. And so there are Republican women who, I will assure any Republican woman who's thinking of running as a pro-choice Republican, there are people in the party who will be more than willing to help you. We will also help people who are running across the state. It is critical that we begin to lay down a marker in 2013.
Well, there is our music again. We all know what that means. Go to the Women's Strike Force, womensstrikeforce.org, and sign up there if you're interested in running for office. Go to the NARAL Pro-Choice Virginia.org site to stay involved in rapid response. Thanks for watching.